Go Hunt Life show hosted by Todd Nevins.
This is Todd Nevins, and I interview people that had seemingly normal lives and careers going, but they pulled the ripcord to epically reinvent themselves in order to pursue a life full of purpose and passion. This episode is sponsored by PrintDirtCheap.com. Jeff Chrisman, the founder of Print Dirt Cheap, and the crew there are rock stars when it comes to delivering top quality printing at a cheap price. If you've met me in the last 3 years and I handed you a business card, it was printed by Print Dirt Cheap. They're my online digital printing company for everything. They do banners, company letterhead, a ton of direct mail pieces, funky decals, even menus for restaurants, over 30 categories of printing products, and yes, business cards. And they do it fast and they do it cheap. Jeff has streamlined every little aspect of the business to provide the perfect user experience, delivering the best product in the industry. I have personally been to the offices and I have seen it firsthand. But see for yourself. Go to PrintDirtCheap.com and use promo code GoHuntLife and get $10 off of your order. Or if you want to get a sample of their work, click on Sample Pack and they'll mail you one out for free. Go to PrintDirtCheap.com, use promo code GoHuntLife for $10 off of your next print job.
I really enjoy those first couple weeks of confusion. I don't like to miss out on that fish out of water feeling. That is a really important, humbling type of thing, but it's also something that once you've gone through it, you feel just a million times more capable because you got through all that confusion. You worked your way through the fog of complete ignorance to a place where you can at least go into the grocery store and buy something without looking like a total buffoon.
That is Colin Wright, and he is an author, a podcaster, a speaker, and a full-time traveler. For the last 8 years, he's traveled to 60 different countries. He's traveled to all of the lower 48 states twice, and he's done this basically in 4-month increments. And as he just said, he truly enjoys the uncomfortable situations that his chosen lifestyle puts him in. Another interesting point is that the places that he moves to are chosen by his readers. They vote on his next destination, and that's where he goes. But in 2009, he was running his own branding studio in LA, working a crazy amount of hours, making a ton of cash, and when he took a hard look at his mentors, he realized that his life path was following theirs. And he also realized that they were miserable. So inside of 4 months, he completely transformed his world. He got on a plane leaving the United States for the very first time in his life. Where did he go? His readers said Argentina. So that's where he began. My conversation with Colin Wright starts right now. Colin, thanks for jumping on the show today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Where are you today, and describe what you would see if you were to walk outside the door?
I am on the 9th floor of an old building, early 20th century building here in Memphis, Tennessee, and I don't have to guess actually what I would see. I'm staring out my window right now. There is a storm front rolling through, so I'm seeing these great big black billowy clouds outlining downtown Memphis, which includes a giant glass pyramid if you've never been here before. So it's a very stunning sight, but also incredibly bizarre at the same time.
Awesome. All right. How old are you? Are you married? And do you have kids?
I'm 32. I am not married, and I do not have kids.
And what are the primary ways that you make money currently?
I make most of my living off of my books. I do make a certain amount each year, depends on the year, what percentage of my income this makes up, but I make some from speaking gigs, and I make some money increasingly from my podcast as well.
Okay. But in the last 8-9 years, you have traveled to 60 countries, all 48 states in the U.S. twice, road tripped across South America, wandered through Southeast Asia, trained across Europe. But back in 2008, 2009, you were living in Los Angeles and your passport had 0 stamps on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been making up for lost time.
Take me back to 2009. What were you doing?
I was a young 20-something running a branding studio out in Los Angeles, and very, very driven, very entrepreneurial. I was very fixated on earning a crazy amount of money and then retiring young so I could get around to living. I had it set in my head from a very early age that, hey, if you could earn like $1 million by the time you're in your 30s, then you could just stop, right? And then just live off the interest or something like that. So my goal at the time, back in 2009, was to earn $1 million before I was 30 and then finally go out and hit the road. So my entire lifestyle was kind of oriented toward that goal.
And what was a typical week? Like, it was your company that you had started?
Yeah. It's my company. And essentially what I was doing, I was kind of a one-man army doing the tasks that a lot of larger studios take on. So a big company would come to me and say, we want to start a Reddit for fashion or something like that. They'd hand me a dossier with all of the demographic information and what they're aiming for, kind of the vibe that they're aiming for. And I would work up the style guide, build the website, write the copy, design the logo, put the whole thing together, hand it back to them and say, okay, you have a company. And it was something that I enjoyed doing, but it was a crazy amount of work. And so it really did gobble up essentially all of my time. I didn't have much time for a life outside of that. I didn't have time for excessive leisure activities like sleep and eating. And so, when I say that my lifestyle was oriented around that goal, it was really fixated on these types of very large projects that involved a whole lot of money, but that also, as a consequence of that, also absorbed a great deal of my time, attention, and energy.
Were you buying toys and a house and all the stuff?
Yeah, I was living with my girlfriend, who was also an entrepreneur, so she was kind of living a similar lifestyle to the one that I was living, and we spent a lot of money. A lot of people do this, I find, where when you have less time but you're earning a lot of money, you tend to spend a lot of that money trying to convince yourself that the time that you do have available is time well spent. So you blow gobs of money trying to make that 5 hours a week that you have to spend on whatever seem like the same amount of joy that you would get out of like having all week to yourself. But when in reality, what it really means is that you're just indulging in a great deal of excess. So there was a great deal of excess. I was living with my girlfriend at this townhouse by the beach. We had a 2-car garage, which was unheard of over in that part of town. We had all these little luxuries and then some larger luxuries, and then spent a whole lot of our time, quote unquote, networking, which essentially means going out and drinking with people and hoping that you meet a client.
If someone would have asked you back then, though, hey, man, are you happy? Like, what was the answer?
I probably would have said yes, but that answer would have come from a lack of perspective, I think. I was happy in that I was challenged and I felt I was doing good work. And I did feel that I was successful according to the metrics that I was paying attention to at the time. That said, as soon as I allowed myself to step back and look at the big picture, I realized that I was also kind of killing myself in a lot of different ways, in terms of health, in terms of my relationships, and in terms of my, not my sanity exactly, but my mental fortitude. I was definitely becoming a lot more fragile in a lot of those areas as a result of that single-mindedness. And then the happiness was really more of a comparison-driven happiness. Like, I am doing really well in my field compared to other people my age, and therefore people respect me, and therefore I must be happy, right? As opposed to an internally derived type of happiness, which I think is the better, more sustainable type.
I talk to people on this podcast that live that life deep into their 30s and 40s and 50s before they reach a breaking point or a tipping point, and it's uncommon for someone to reach it at your age. What was that breaking point that you finally realized, wait a minute, this isn't working for me, I can't keep this up, or I don't want to keep it up?
I was very fortunate to have a lot of variables pushing me in that direction, and it was a kind of a confluence of different things. Probably the aha eureka moment, though, was when I finally took a vacation with my girlfriend, and we left town, and we both kind of realized at the same time, or rather we both admitted to ourselves and to each other at the same time, that what we were doing was unsustainable and wasn't actually what we wanted, and that we could probably cut out the middleman, the thing that we thought we had to do to get to where we wanted to be. We could probably just go and do the things that we wanted to do without having to earn infinite dollars first, the way that we were planning to do it. So that perspective, stepping out of not just LA, but stepping out of my habits and routines and allowing myself just to take a couple days off and get some sleep and eat decently well and have a conversation with my girlfriend, who I lived with but never saw. Like, all of these little things gave me that big picture perspective for the first time in years. And all of it kind of came crashing down. And I realized, looking at the mentors that I had, the people who I really looked up to, these very well-respected, 100 millionaire, billionaire people who are doing exactly what I hoped to achieve someday, I realized that they were like really unhappy on a lot of levels. They were very successful by very specific metrics, but by so many other metrics, every other metric essentially, they had just completely atrophied as human beings. And I realized that I had no reason to believe I was any smarter than them and more capable of following that exact same path that they had followed, and yet doing it better somehow.
Atrophied as human beings is an incredibly scary thing to see in someone that is your mentor, and I'm assuming 10, 20, 30 years older than you. That had to have scared the shit out of you.
Yeah, but at the same time, it was incredibly valuable because it made it so clear that this was not just a quick, wild decision that I could make and that there would be a million trade-offs. Like, there were a lot of trade-offs, but it seemed so incredibly worthwhile being able to look into the future in that way and see incredibly clearly what my life could look like 40 years from now. And I could have hundreds of millions of dollars, but also have 7 divorces, and also have a handful of kids that don't talk to me, and also have incredible health problems that will never go away no matter how much money I throw at the problem. And that's what I saw in these people. And that's not to say that they would feel the same way. Perhaps they look at their life and say, yeah, this is exactly what I wanted to do. We all have different standards for that type of thing. But for me and my actual standards, as opposed to the ones that I was working toward out of habit more than anything else, that type of lifestyle simply didn't fit the bill.
How did you begin the task of unraveling that life and getting rid of it all and getting on a plane and flying out of the United States for the first time?
It took a while. It was actually a full-time job, more or less, for about 4 months. And in those 4 months, I managed to get rid of everything that I owned that didn't fit into carry-on luggage. I had a laptop bag and a duffel bag, and scaled my business down to something that I could run from my laptop. So I started doing more brand consulting rather than doing the whole brand package thing. And that would bring in significantly less money, but then I would also have significantly reduced expenses, was the idea there. But then it was a whole lot of just kind of reshaping my mindset as well. And that was a whole lot of the work that was done in those 4 months, was reshaping my opinions and attitudes and goals and the story that I was telling myself about my life. This is who you are. This is what you do. This is where you want to be. Things like that. It was just a whole lot of sitting and thinking and making some mistakes, and mostly giving away a crazy accumulation of stuff that I somehow had stockpiled over the years.
What were those mentors telling you? Were they telling you, number one, what are you doing? You're crazy. You're blowing it. Or number two, oh my God, I wish I would have done that at your age?
A little bit of both. A few of them were definitely disappointed because I was working with them and I was providing services that they needed. So on a business level, they were disappointed, but on a personal level, they said, good for you. A few others, and one in particular actually stuck with me. He basically asked me to come be his protege and run some of his businesses. And so there was this very big potential there to work with this one guy and to reach that goal of earning my $1 million in the next couple of years and being in the spot that I always saw myself being in. And he was just so incredibly disappointed and could not wrap his head around why I was doing what I was doing, giving up what I was giving up, why I was wasting all of the potential, the skills, the relationships, everything that I had built, why I was giving it all away for something that to him was meaningless and valueless, because there wasn't an easy way to quantify it. There wasn't an easy way to put a dollar sign on it. So I got some of that response as well, an unfortunate amount of that, but it was also it reinforced what I already supposed, that those were also the people telling me, what the hell are you doing with yourself? They were also the ones that had the lives that I really, really did not want. So it kind of made sense that our ideologies would differ in that regard.
Yeah, when you're having those conversations and saying, no, man, I honestly don't want to turn out like you. That's really what I'm getting at. I don't know how else to put it, but I really don't want to turn out like you with your life. That's tough. So you get down to what would fit in a carry-on. Was there a big like event, party, send off? Colin, you're gonna, good luck, that kind of stuff, or did you just go to LAX?
There was, though it wasn't specifically for me. My girlfriend at the time, she also had a similar realization at the same time and decided to make a similar move in her life. And we decided, while we were on that one vacation we ever took, that for us to do this, we kind of needed to break up. We didn't want to stay together for the kids being our lifestyle and our professional lifestyle and our network and everything like that. So we decided that we still wanted to be friends. We were still important to each other, but we needed to change the dynamic of our relationship, and that would mean that we would need to become friends. And so we decided to have a send-off for our relationship and to have a breakup party and to invite all our friends over and celebrate a wonderful relationship that had outlived its utility. And so the last kind of going away party for both of us, because she was on her way up to Seattle when I left the country, we invited everybody over, had a great big send-off for us in terms of leaving geographically, but also in terms of us changing up our relationship and becoming friends.
Were you sad or what?
Yeah, both sad and or what, I think.
Yeah.
It was difficult, and it was something that the entire time, all the way through the end, and even weeks afterwards, there was a whole lot of doubt. Is this something that, seems like it'll be a good idea, but in fact, you're just being a crazy person? Is this something that you're giving up all of this for something that you don't even know what you're going to get out of it? You don't even know exactly what you hope to gain. You can't, put numbers on it. You can't express exactly what it is you're hoping to pursue. So, yeah, there was a lot of doubt. There was a lot of sadness. There were tears. It wasn't an easy decision, even though both of us were incredibly excited for what came next. It wasn't something that was easy. So there was a very high cost for pursuing what we both individually wanted to pursue.
And then what came next for you? What was your plan? And did you have enough money saved and from liquidating your stuff to live for years? Like, what were you going to do and how were you going to pay for it?
Well, the idea initially was to continue doing something like what I was doing. I was going to consult on branding and kind of build out the outline and the philosophy behind brands, and then hire out the rest of it rather than doing all the grunt work myself as I typically did. And that worked for a certain degree for about the first year. But the idea was that I had drastically lowered expenses, so I wouldn't need to earn the crazy amount that I was earning in LA either. So I was hoping that would balance out. And ideally, the idea was to continue doing that. I had a little bit of money put away. I essentially paid off all of my debt right before I left LA. So I was earning a good deal of money, but I was also spending a good deal of money. And I had just enough to pay off all of my debt from school and my car and everything else. And to still have, I still had, I think, maybe $18,000 or $20,000 in the bank, which was nice to have. But I also didn't know how long that would need to last me.
Yeah,
because
that could go quick.
Yeah. And a big part of my business model was predicated on meeting new clients in LA. So I had a lot of different mechanisms of doing that. As soon as you leave town, that dissipates. So I did not know what to expect in terms of my future. I didn't know how long that would last me. And I knew I'd make a lot of mistakes too. And I did. Definitely made a whole lot of expensive, thankfully not cataclysmically expensive, but expensive mistakes along the way.
So where did you go first when you left?
The first place I went was Buenos Aires in Argentina.
Why there?
My readers of the blog that I had started during those 4 months when I was transitioning and getting rid of everything, I started up a blog, and I didn't know where to go. So I asked my readers to vote, and they chose Argentina.
So you started the blog exilelifestyle.com, and you started it actually on May 3rd, 2009 is when you reserved the URL. And so the definition of exile is the state of being barred from one's native country, typically for political or punitive reasons. Is that, like, why did you choose Exile Lifestyle? I love it, but that's interesting.
It gives you an idea, I think, of where my mind was at the time.
Yeah, it does.
Because the idea was to get out of my own personal rut, kind of. I was always very good at school, and I found that I was pretty good at business, but I also recognized that there was so much about the world I didn't know that I wouldn't be able to read about. And so the idea was to kind of exile myself, to extract myself from what I was comfortable with and from the cultures, the entrepreneurial culture, the academic culture, these cultures that I was very familiar with, to extract myself from them, to shun myself out of those familiar spaces, so that I would be forced to learn more about these places and cultures and other ways of seeing the world that otherwise I would have no other reason to ever expose myself to.
And you've been traveling and working full-time since 2009, and for the most part, you've chosen to stay in each location for just 4 months. Why 4 months?
Initially, the thought process was that with 4 months, then I could visit multiple countries a year. And I also realized that in 4 months, I transitioned my entire lifestyle in LA from one thing to another thing. So it was a decent amount of time to work with. Like, you can actually get a whole lot done in 4 months if you're very focused and you have a very particular end that you're looking to get. So I figured it was short enough time I'd be able to fit multiple countries in a year, so then I would have more to compare, because at this point I had never left the country. I had very little to compare all these different places to, and I wanted to have more cultures and locations to compare and contrast with each other. But it was enough that I thought I could get not like a super deep exposure to the culture, because that takes years and years, or decades if you really want to do it well. But it's enough that if I really worked at it, I could make friends, I could have a neighborhood that felt like my neighborhood, I could understand the basic rhythms of a place, learn some of the language, and do things like that.
And then your readers chose the next spot and the next spot and the next spot, just kept you going. Yeah,
it worked so well. It was so much fun and it's so interesting. It wouldn't have been the first place I would have chosen, because I had never left the country. My idea of what the world was like was incredibly limited at the time. So as a result, my list of options that came to mind immediately were very limited as well. And I liked that. I liked that pseudo-randomization that also got people involved and thinking about where they would want to go. And so a lot of people emailed me afterwards and said, I voted for this place. You didn't end up going there, so I decided I was going to go. And I just thought that was so cool as a way of getting people involved with that thought process as well.
Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Click Placement, a digital agency designing Google AdWords and pay-per-click marketing strategies for startups, small businesses, and even people building a side hustle. Hit up clickplacement.com to start a conversation. If you would like to personally support the Go Hunt Life podcast, go to patreon.com/Go Hunt Life to make a donation.
Okay, so as you go through the first year, let's say, did your plan of continuing to make money and consult, were you able to keep that up, or did it not work out that way?
I was able to keep doing it for the better part of a year, but it very quickly became evident that, one, it was difficult to get new clients, and two, it was doing kind of an injustice to my clients that I was... At the time, I segued away from it. I was in New Zealand. So I was like 20 time zones ahead of LA, first of all. But also the internet at the time in New Zealand was just tragically bad. It wasn't their decision to make it that way. They were just so far away that they only got essentially Australia's backwash. Australia had a cable connected to other continents directly, and then they had a little cable that ran to New Zealand. So they got like this very small bandwidth of internet to spend for the entire country. And so they were still selling dial-up internet while I was there. It was so slow.
Oh my
I
gosh.
Skype with anybody. I couldn't send large files in via email. Even things like Starbucks, the old reliable place to go if you need Wi-Fi anywhere in the world, you had to pay $10 to get like 1 megabyte worth of internet access. It was insane. So I realized that I couldn't really depend on a service style, or at least that type of service style business model, because I didn't know what the future was going to hold. I didn't know where I would end up. And I knew that having to have an umbilical to the rest of the world in that way, having to be constantly tethered to it, otherwise I lose my source of income, that was not going to be tenable in the future. And so while I was in New Zealand, I started to transition. I looked at some marketing things that I had done. Basically, when I was first promoting the blog, I thought, how can I get people to show up to this thing? So I wrote a couple free ebooks on things like personal branding, things that I already knew about to draw people in, and gave it away for free as a way of drawing people in. And I thought, well, maybe if I write one of these that's good enough and valuable enough, maybe somebody would pay me for it. And it turned out, thankfully, that they did. So while I was there, I began my transition into my current profession as an author.
At any point at that time, did you consider, okay, this has been fun, I've seen some countries, it's time to get back to LA and get back after it?
I thought that I probably would, and I left myself a whole lot of outs early on, a whole lot of opportunities to check in and say, okay, now I've been to South America, time to go back to LA, things like that. I thought that at some point I would miss all of the extras, all of the little friction-free services and valuable things that we have here in the U.S. that you can't expect elsewhere. Things like peanut butter. It's hard to find peanut butter in Argentina. Like stupid little things like that kind of gnaw at you when you know that you can't have them. But all of the things that I was gaining, all of the new knowledge, the new friends, the new ways of viewing the world, it was just so much fun. It was so interesting and challenging in a new way that I never really felt compelled. I never, the trade-off to go back never seemed like even a vaguely compelling argument to me. It seemed like I'd be giving up too much.
How long into this did you reach a point where you felt like this was your new normal life? I can imagine moving every 4 months. It would have taken years maybe, but how long did it take you?
Well, I started probably from Argentina onward. I started telling people, I started to describe myself in this way, just in kind of branding terms as a way of explaining what I'm doing, trying to convey the philosophy behind it and the lifestyle intention behind it.
Yeah.
I probably started to feel comfortable as somebody who was not like faking it until they make it. A couple years in. It probably took a couple years before I felt like I was actually the person that I was trying to become, really comfortable and confident being on the road full time.
Did writing and then publishing books and making money off of that had to have helped with feeling that way, that validation that, okay, I can keep this up, I can do this. Did that come into play as well?
It certainly helped, yeah. Having a more independent business model, something separate from clients paying you on their time frame and whenever they decide to, and then also something that gives you the incentive to constantly be looking at yourself and your actions and the way that you respond to things, and then sharing what you learn, but also just telling stories, sharing the experience with other people. Over time, you gain a little bit more credibility in the eyes of other people, but I think it does the same for you internally as well when you realize, hey, I've actually learned a whole lot. I'm telling people things that are actually valuable, as opposed to just regurgitating something that I read elsewhere.
You gave a TED Talk on July of 2015, and it's called Extremes Are Easy. And you start it by saying, extremes are easy, balance is hard. But like yourself, and most people are defined by their extremes and not their balance. You're still going. Like, what is your balance?
Well, generally, I feel like a full-time lifestyle, for me at least, for me and my priorities and for the things that I like to do, the way that I like to live, the pace of life that I enjoy, traveling much more rapidly. The way that I've done a few times, maybe a year and a half ago, I traveled around primarily Western Europe really rapidly. Every couple of days, I'd go to another city in another country. And that type of travel is really invigorating and interesting, and you see a lot very quickly, but you also, I also tend to wear out very quickly when I don't have time to just settle in and have privacy and have a place that I consider to be my home and have a day where I'm not trying to see as much as possible, but can just walk down the street with no goals, no intentions beyond just ambling around, being in my own head. And so for me, when I'm looking for balance, it's trying to balance that newness, that novelty, and the pursuit of challenging, valuable frictions with certain levels of comfort and certain mental spaces where I can go to feel kind of cozy, to sit and mull over what I've done and all those challenges that I've faced and all of the growth that I've achieved in the meantime. And so the 4-month thing works really well for that. But then other things that I've done in between as well, where I'll maybe go to a couple of countries for 4 months at a time, and then I'll go visit my parents for 2 weeks and just take the time to see them, which is good unto itself, but then also take the time off away from everything around you being a potential threat or opportunity, everything around you being new and nobody speaking the same language as you, and everything being full of friction in that way. So being able to balance the extremes makes the extremes that you do choose to pursue and which are valuable and which can come to define you, it makes them much more sustainable over a period of time.
Yeah. Okay, so if you're moving at that quick of a pace, another TED Talk is titled "Get Rid of the Unnecessary to Get Down to the Basics." And when you are going from 4 months at a time, or even what you just described that quickly, like, how have you kept your personal relationships intact? Not only the people that you knew before, but the people that you've met along the way. Like, how have you kept those intact?
Very carefully. That could probably go for most things when you're traveling in this way, but it really is with more care. Like the concept behind that talk, and also behind a lot of the things that I do, is about focusing on intentionality and being intentional with your relationships. In this case, is kind of like being intentional with your possessions, where you might own fewer things but better, and you really get the maximal amount of joy out of all the things that you have. And so you don't just buy just to buy to fill up your home. You buy with a very intentional purpose in mind. And with relationships, it works the same way. I don't have a gazillion friends that I need to be in touch with every day. I have a lot of people that, if I'm in the same country, if we're in the same city, we'll definitely go out for a coffee and catch up. But we're not people who even communicate necessarily more than once a year. Whereas the people who are very foundational and super important and vital, I have as much time as I want to spend with them, chatting with them, keeping up with them, sending internet jokes to each other, things like that. Because of that intentionality, because my life isn't filled up with the vast majority of my exchanges being taken up by people who I just happen to sit next to at the office or at school, friendships of convenience. Because there's not so many of those, I have a lot more time and energy to spend on the ones with people who, even if they're in a completely different country, we still make the effort to connect regularly, and in whichever means, using whichever tools and technologies make sense.
Now that you've been at it for years, you've got friends and relationships and people in your life that you can trust and depend on all over the world. Do you now find yourself deciding where you're going to travel based on maybe people that are already there that you can rely on, meet up with? Is that swaying your decision now?
Not typically, actually not typically in the way you would think. Typically, I have people vote on the country I go to, and then I choose the city. At the moment, I'm doing kind of a weird deviation where I'm traveling around the U.S., so people choose the state, I choose the city. Okay. But typically, as opposed to people choosing it and then saying, dude, come to so-and-so city, come hang out here, come spend time with us, we'll show you around. Typically, if I do end up in their country, I'll usually go to a different city, and not to avoid them or anything, but because I really enjoy those first couple weeks of confusion of going to a place. And you know what like anybody who's traveled and gone someplace unfamiliar, it is so rewarding. Every little victory is your own victory. And I mean, I've gone to places where I have readers, I have friends, things like that. And I haven't told them exactly when I show up, or I tell them I'm taking a few weeks to myself first to get situated, because I really, really like to explore on my own and figure things out through the lenses of my own eyes before I figure them out through somebody else's biases and their experiences. And then I can add that later. Later, after I've had my own experiences, I can go meet up with them for a coffee and pick their brain about the city and get some better, deeper advice on certain things. But I don't like to miss out on that fish out of water feeling. That is a really important, humbling type of thing, but it's also something that once you've gone through it, you feel just a million times more capable because you got through all that confusion. You worked your way through the fog of complete ignorance to a place where you can at least go into the grocery store and buy something without looking like a total buffoon.
I would assume that a lot of that 2-week confusion is a language barrier if you don't speak the local language. But how have you changed to tackle that 2 weeks of confusion, or do you just relish in it and welcome it?
Part of it's the language barrier. I've always been terrible with languages. I pick them up a little bit faster now, or at least a functional version of the local language. Yeah, I've gotten better at knowing how I learn, going out into the world, incentivizing myself to go home and research and to practice, and then go back out and look like an idiot several more times before I learn to say something correctly. I'm far more visually emotive now. When I started traveling, when I was in LA, my ex, she was an actor. And so she was incredibly emotive and animated with everything that she did. Everything, you could tell exactly what she was saying or even thinking without being able to hear her. She was just so expressive. And I was not. I was the exact polar opposite. But traveling, you have to make your intentions known. Otherwise, you seem like this immense threat. And so I've gotten much better at wearing my heart on my sleeve, wearing my intentions on my face and in my body language, and gesticulating in a way that I hope won't be threatening in the local culture, and coming up with nonverbal ways to communicate as well. You can actually get pretty far that way for those first couple weeks. But in terms of changing, probably the most dramatic change has been becoming comfortable looking like an idiot. And this is another thing I think most travelers it'll probably be a familiar feeling, because when you grow up within a very specific place and you're in the same culture, whatever that culture might be it academic, or if you want to say United States culture, or you want to say the entrepreneurial world culture, as you learn more and gain more mastery, you don't want to look stupid. You want to look like the type of person who answers questions, not like the type of person who asks questions. And when you consistently enough expose yourself to situations in which you have no option but to be the one asking even the dumbest questions, the questions that the smallest child around you knows the answer to, but you do not, you become very comfortable with being that asker of questions. And so for me, I'm far more comfortable being the person asking and being the person who's risking looking like an idiot to get the answers that I want, as opposed to the person who stays quiet but ignorant.
Amazing. All right. So you said at the beginning of our conversation that you're a writer, you're a speaker, you host a podcast. So you've written 15 books. You host Let's Know Things, the podcast, and you speak internationally. What do you focus on more?
At the moment, I am most focused on the podcast and a few other things associated with that. I play music and sing, and so I've been doing a whole lot of at-home recording and playing in addition to the recording of the podcast. But I've always got kind of a book running in the background, and I write a bi-weekly newsletter, and I write essays for my blog, and there's a whole lot of everything involved in all the things that I do. But right now, the primary focus is the podcast, I'd say. And
you just passed your 1-year anniversary. So tell me what the podcast is about.
Let's Know Things is a podcast about adding context to the news. So it's kind of an extrapolation of something that I used to do. I used to write for my city newspaper, and I would write news analysis columns, essentially taking something that's happening in the news that day and explaining it to people. Like, here's the facts that you just got in the article. Here is why that's important, and here's how it connects to other things that you might know about. And so the podcast is very similar to that, except it's much longer. They're usually like 45 minutes to an hour and a half.
What's the biggest thing that you've learned so far after a year?
It's interesting that the mediums that we use to reach people really do change the dynamic of our communication. And you could say the exact same words. I could take every single word that I say in the podcast and write it down and send it to people as an email, and that would be different from the same words written as a blog post. And that would be different from the same words written as a series of Twitter posts. And that would be different from the way that I speak them into the microphone and that people receive them into their earbuds or through their Bluetooth speaker. Mm-hmm. There's different levels of intimacy. There's different types of acceptance almost. People take in information differently, I think, depending on how cozy they feel or who else they're around. If it's a group activity, a group of people listening to something rather than a single person reading something on their phone. So it's nice to have those different options. I feel really fortunate to live at a time where I have so many different potential vehicles, different ways to send this information out into the world.
I do too. And you mentioned your work. Are you always working on another book?
Oh yeah, there's usually 2 or 3 going on in the background, either being outlined or kind of just at the initial phase of what is that going to be and working through the conceptual stuff before I finally do sit down and spend a couple weeks worth of 16-hour days finally knocking it out.
Got it. And you're in Memphis. So is your readers chose Tennessee and then you chose Memphis?
Yeah. I spent the better part of a year in Wichita, Kansas first, as kind of the most exotic place I could think to go within the United States. For me, in my past experiences, at least, it was very exotic to me. There's a lot going on in the U.S. that I don't understand right now. So I thought this would be a good blank space to fill in on my experience collection. But then I wanted to go one more place before I left the U.S. after that. So I said, where should I go? They voted for Tennessee. A lot of the people who voted came from Nashville. Yeah. And I enjoy Nashville, but kind of like I mentioned before, they wanted me to show up there. They were hoping I'd come to Nashville. I'm sure I would have had a lovely time, but I wanted to go someplace a little bit more confusing and a little bit different from my other experiences. And I do tend to root for the underdog too. And Memphis is very much a place with a rich cultural heritage, but it's also a kind of an underdog compared to the comparably wealthy Nashville.
It is. We've spent a number of weekends in Memphis. It is an underdog city, and the people that we've met there like that too. They like being the underdog.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lovely place.
So how many of the last few years, you had mentioned you come back and you stay with your parents. I know you're from Central Missouri. Like how long have you spent in the United States versus outside of it in the last 8 years?
It's been mostly outside. I do try to come back in between whenever I can. I've got a million little things I try to keep in mind that I've learned from other people, that I've learned about myself, things that are priorities that, because I have the wherewithal to spend my time on these things, I should really make sure to do so. So spending my time on projects that I think are interesting, even if they're not going to make me a ton of money, spending time with my family is something that comes up a lot. And it's something that's already important, but it's also something that I know a lot of people, as they get older, it's something that people wish they would have done more of when everyone involved was younger. So for me, it's important to go back and visit my parents, visit my siblings who are scattered all over the place around the U.S. right now, and then to come back to the U.S. from time to time to see other parts of the U.S. that I haven't seen before, hence the road tripping. And one time I road tripped around the U.S. just on Greyhound buses, which was a very different experience as well. So things like that. I try to mix the return to the country with another learning experience whenever possible.
And where are you going next?
I have no idea.
When is that when is it going to happen? When's the 4 months expire?
Well, I'm going to be here in Memphis for a year in total. So it'll be next, August, right? Is this month August? Yeah, yep. Something like that. So it's going to be like 11 months from now. So I've got a little bit of runway to figure it out, but I'm not sure exactly how I'll do it. I'll probably have people vote.
Okay, so some places that you go to that you're only there 4 months or less, are you Airbnb-ing? Are you go to hostels and then now you're there for a year? Like, where do you sign a lease? That seems like a big commitment for you.
Yeah, well, here and in Kansas, I had to sign a lease, which it felt so weird. And that's part of why I wanted to do it, though, is because I realized that usually when I travel, I make deals with the people who own the apartments. Typically, they're looking for a lease, and I'm like, listen, I'm going to be here for like 4 months. Can I just pay you a little bit more per month? And if somebody comes in and wants to sign a year lease, then you can kick me out if you give me a couple weeks notice. And they're typically furnished apartments, and so I don't have to worry about anything like that. I'll usually stay one night in a hostel while I'm looking around, wandering around town looking for a place to stay. But otherwise, I have my own apartment, but it's furnished. Here, though, part of the reason I wanted to do this, take the time in Kansas and take the time here in Memphis, was that one of the most terrifying things I could think of was to have a lease and to have a car. I haven't owned a car in all this time, so I had to buy a car because you can't live in Kansas or Tennessee without a car. I had to buy furniture, and I haven't bought furniture since I left LA. Like, all these things were just incredibly, like, almost debilitatingly terrifying to me because they just seemed like such commitments, but also like such... I had grown so much in the 7 or 8 years leading up to that. And I didn't know what kind of furniture I liked because I'd gotten so good at just adjusting to whatever my surroundings gave me, whatever was common for the country that I was in. Like, if you have these incredibly specific standards and you go and find this crazy cool place in the middle of nowhere in Romania, but the furniture is like all this old Soviet stuff, and you're like, nope, not going to live there. I've got these standards. Well, then you're screwed. Yeah. So you learn to be very flexible and malleable. And I'd been so malleable for so long that I didn't have any specific taste of my own in that regard. And I couldn't really relate to people who had car insurance and stuff because it had been so long since I'd had that. I was 24 the last time I had car insurance. And now I'm 32. So I thought it would be a valuable experience to face that fear in addition to the other things that I wanted to learn with this particular adventure that I'm currently on.
That is interesting. Okay, so next year your lease expires. Let's say you get to choose now, and you choose a country, but you have to move there for 1 year. What country do you choose?
I get asked this a lot, and I never have a satisfactory answer. The problem is I could really go anywhere and have a good time. It would be better if it's a place that I haven't been because then everything is new and exciting. And it's usually the places that people think are going to be really boring for some reason. Like, they're like, oh, you don't want to go there. That's the worst. There's nothing to do there. And it's those places I'm like, oh, yeah, you want to bet? Wrong. Yeah, I'll find what's interesting about it. The fact that you think it's so uninteresting makes me think that there's something really deep-rooted and fascinating there. Yep. But someplace I've looked into doing this, and it's just incredibly difficult on multiple levels, but I would love to go live at one of the stations in Antarctica. Yeah. And everybody tells me, it's like being on the moon or something. Like, you get cabin fever. You have to stay in these little capsules a whole lot of the time. I could totally do that. I feel like I would be very capable. I prefer cold weather, and I prefer like darkness to sunlight. Beaches have never been my thing. I burn like crazy. I have allergies. And so a place where everything is dead and dark and dreary and cold sounds fantastic to me. Oh, my gosh.
All right. I uncovered something in your background that may put some context into your previous life. On February 22nd, 2008, at 12:31 a.m., you sent out your first tweet at Colin is my name. Do you remember what it was?
I do, because I looked back on it and I'm like, man, I hope I said something deep, and I did not. And I remember sending that tweet. I was at work at the time, and I had just seen the movie 300.
Watching 300, ... underwhelmed.
Yeah, well, the thing was, I loved the graphic novel. And so I was so disappointed with the way that the movie turned out. A lot of people disagree with me. A lot of people, particularly who just loved all of the hardcore abs that were going on in that movie. But it was not what I was hoping for.
Good gosh. All right. That is all I have for you today. You can find Colin at colin.io and also exilelifestyle.com and check out the podcast. Let's Know Things. Colin, that is all I've got for you today, man. Thank you very much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Don't forget to hit up the rock stars at printdirtcheap.com. Use promo code GoHuntLife for $10 off of your next print job. For fast, cheap, and high-quality online printing, it's printdirtcheap.com. Hey, Life Hunters. Thank you for listening to this episode of Go Hunt Life. If you like the show and would like to support it, go to iTunes and do this. Subscribe to the show, leave a rating, and review it. It helps. And thank you. If you or someone that you know has quit their normal life to follow their dreams, I would love an introduction and maybe interview them on the show. You can find me at GoHuntLife.com and also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest at Go Hunt Life. Until next time, stay weird, dare greatly, and ripcord out.